There are sick cows to treat. You could spend time finding them, or they could come to you with AffiSort. Fast, affordable, accurate. That's the power of AffiMilk.
Hello, I'm Matthew Malcolm with the California Dairy Magazine, reporting to you from the World Ag Expo in Tulare. There's a lot of great seminars, including one led by Lucas Fuess from Rabobank Finance. He's the dairy expert, and wanted to talk with you about your presentation today. You mentioned, you kind of gave an outlook of the global milk economy and what dairy producers can expect in the near term, but also the long term. So what can you tell us?
Yeah, it's the question I think on everyone's mind is always looking at global milk supply and coupled with global milk demand. I think notably over the past several months we've seen a pretty tight contraction in overall milk supply, and that's from most key areas around the world. So New Zealand had a flat season, nothing really impressive coming from down under over the past several months. The European Union, a big milk producer, has been down for the past several months, and we expect a weaker spring flush period coming up as well. And then here in the U.S., we've seen 6 consecutive months now of weaker milk production. The most recent data, of course, through December, but we do expect pretty flat output through this spring. Globally, supplies are tight, but unfortunately, it doesn't really matter because demand has been lower as well, kind of creating quite a balance there in supply and demand. Overall, when we typically see tighter milk output, we would expect more of a bullish price response, but that hasn't necessarily materialized as of yet.
So as far as some of the factors and reasons for that demand, I know we've had some economical issues with over the last few years. With exports has been a challenge, and with the rise in U.S. currency, inflation rate. I mean, how are all these playing a factor in being able to keep prices higher, keep production going and out there to take care of the world demand?
Yeah, it's kind of a combination of many of those factors. I think some pretty key things that we're watching from the demand standpoint are economic concerns in general, not only in the U.S., but more so globally. I think a lot of regions had kind of bought up a lot of dairy products throughout, say, 2022, which kind of prevented them from really needing to step back in the market throughout 2023. Hopefully this changes a little bit in the near term. We do expect a slow resurgence in demand throughout the next several months. Unfortunately, nothing immediately, but throughout this calendar year in general, we are looking at a bit more demand to kind of be supportive to prices opposite the still tight supply.
And I know there's been more interest in Mexico, for example, of how exports have been a challenge, but that's not as far away, right, as far as transportation goes. So that's been a highlighted market for the U.S. What do we see going on potentially over there?
Great question. Mexico, thankfully, one of the bright spots in total dairy demand, especially in product moving from the United States. Our number one dairy customer, and while we had some challenges in 2023 on total exports, Mexico was kind of a rock star for us, buying, in some cases, record amounts of cheese and non-fat dry milk. Their demand really strong when places like Southeast Asia, China, backing off a little bit. So overall, thankfully to Mexico, they continue to buy a lot of product from the U.S. where we have that, as you mentioned, location advantage.
And as far as a more of a long-term view of what we feel for the future, what do we see? You know, we've had some, you mentioned in your presentation a declining in trends for milk production in some of the major countries of the world.
Yeah, and from the U.S.'s standpoint, our key competitors, places like Europe, places like New Zealand, we do anticipate their milk production to decline over the long term. They're dealing with sustainability challenges, regulatory issues, just a variety of things that we at Rabobank Finance think they are probably past peak milk, if you will. And while simultaneously we also see global dairy demand growing, which means it's up to us in the U.S. to kind of fill that gap. We see U.S. supply continuing to expand. We see our exports continuing to grow. And over the long term, it's a really positive perspective to have for the strength of the U.S. industry, the growth of the U.S. industry overall.
Now, that growth is not necessarily taking place in California, but maybe some of the other states. Nonetheless, right, it can still impact a positive pricing for California dairy producers, right?
Exactly, yes. And while we are not overly bullish, of course, on growth in California, I think that demand on a national level will be positive from a price standpoint to the dairymen that are here in the Central Valley and in the state.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the insights. Read more about these things in California Dairy Magazine. I'm Matthew Malcolm, CaliforniaAgNet.com.